I drained my pond to prove them wrong and found a road. They hid under their gate. I didn't drain that pond to make a point. I drained it because something felt off. They laughed when the water dropped, until the mud showed a straight stone line cutting toward their gate. That's when I stopped talking and started watching. Because sometimes you don't need to argue, you just let the truth surface. Stick with me on this one. And if you respect standing your ground the right way, go ahead and hit subscribe. The pump had been running since before sunrise. Caleb Mercer stood with one hand resting on the metal housing, feeling the steady vibration travel through his palm like a second heartbeat. The sound was low, mechanical, constant, pulling water out of the pond and sending it down the drainage line toward the lower pasture. It wasn't a decision he made lightly. That pond had been part of the ranch longer than most fences still standing. His father had patched its dam twice. His grandfather had dug the original basin with a rented excavator and a week of stubborn work. Now it was dropping, inch by inch. The surface had already receded enough to expose a wide band of dark mud around the edges. What used to be clear water reflecting the morning sky had turned into something dull and uneven, broken by ridges and shallow trenches where the bottom had begun to show itself. Caleb didn't rush it. He never did. He just watched. Behind him, gravel crunched under tires. He didn't turn right away. He already knew who it was. The white SUV rolled up slow, stopping just short of the fence line like it had every right to be there. Denise Whitaker stepped out first, sunglasses on despite the early hour, clipboard tucked under her arm like it belonged there. Brandon Hale followed from the passenger side, talking into his phone before cutting the call mid-sentence when he saw the pond. They didn't come quietly. Denise walked straight up to the fence, heels pressing into the dry ground, eyes moving from the pump to the water line with something that looked almost amused. "Well," she said, loud enough to carry, "that's one way to make a problem for yourself." Caleb finally turned. He didn't answer. Not yet. Brandon stepped up beside her, hands on his hips, scanning the pond like he was evaluating a bad investment. "You actually did it," Brandon said. "You drained it." Caleb looked back at the water. "Not drained," he said calmly. Lowering. Denise let out a short laugh. "That's not what it looks like," she replied. "Looks like you're tearing up your own land because you didn't like what we told you." Caleb didn't react to that. He had heard worse in the last 2 months. The HOA had made it clear from the start that they didn't like how his land fit into their plans. The development Brandon was pushing, the gated access road, the lakefront expansion, the new property lines, they all pressed right up against the edge of Caleb's ranch. Too close. Close enough that suggestions started showing up in the mail. Then notices. Then Denise Whitaker standing at his fence explaining how things worked now. Caleb hadn't argued then either. He just listened. The pump kept running. The water line dropped another fraction, exposing more of the pond's bottom. The mud wasn't smooth. It never had been. Years of sediment, runoff, and small shifts had left it uneven. But something else was beginning to show now. Something that didn't follow the natural pattern. Caleb saw it before anyone said a word. A line. It cut across the pond floor at an angle that didn't belong to anything natural. Too straight. Too deliberate. At first it was just a faint ridge under the mud, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Caleb stepped forward a few feet, boots sinking slightly into the softer ground near the edge. Denise kept talking behind him. "You know," she said, voice light but sharp underneath, "there are easier ways to deal with a compliance issue. You didn't have to go and ruin your own water source to prove a point." Caleb didn't respond. The line became clearer as the water pulled back further. The mud thinned along its edges, revealing something beneath it. Flat surfaces, not random shapes. Stone, not scattered, not broken. Placed. Brandon stopped mid-sentence. What is that? Caleb didn't answer. He was already moving his gaze along the line, following it across the exposed ground. It didn't wander. It didn't curve. It held its direction like it had somewhere to go. Denise stepped closer to the fence, squinting now. It's probably just debris, she said quickly. Old fill. People dump things in ponds all the time. It's not fill, Brandon cut in, quieter now. The pump droned on. More water slipped away, revealing a longer stretch of the line. The stones were set edge to edge, worn but intact, forming a narrow path that ran straight across the basin. Caleb crouched slightly, not touching it, just looking. He'd walked this pond his whole life, fished it, maintained it, watched it through droughts and storms. That line had never been visible. Denise crossed her arms. You're making a mess over nothing, she said, but there was less confidence in it now. Even if it's something, it doesn't change anything. This is still your land, Caleb. Whatever's down there, it's your problem. Caleb stood back up slowly. He didn't look at her. He kept following the line. It didn't stop at the center of the pond. It kept going, toward the far edge, where the ground rose slightly before leveling out toward the boundary fence, toward the gate. The HOA gate, a heavy steel structure Brandon's crews had installed just weeks earlier, locking off what used to be open access between the ranch and the development site. Denise had called it necessary for property value control. Caleb had called it something else. He didn't say it out loud. Now the line pointed straight at it. Brandon noticed it at the same time. He shifted his stance, eyes narrowing as he traced the direction. That's lining up with the access road, he said. Denise shook her head immediately. No, it's not, she snapped. You're seeing patterns because you want to. Caleb finally turned back to them. For the first time since they arrived, he spoke directly. I didn't say what it was, he said. I just said I wanted to see it. Denise lifted her chin. And now you've seen it, she replied. Congratulations. You tore up your own pond to uncover some old stones. That doesn't change anything about the boundary. Caleb held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked past her, at the gate. Locked, solid, new, and directly in line with something that had been there long before it. The pump continued its steady pull, exposing more of the path with every passing minute. Caleb walked along the edge, keeping parallel to the line, measuring it without tools, just with his eyes and the ground he knew better than anyone. Behind him, Denise was still talking, trying to regain control of the moment. This doesn't give you any leverage, she said. If anything, it shows you've been neglecting your property. There are standards, Caleb. You can't just... He stopped walking. The line was clearer here. The mud had thinned enough that the stones were fully visible, flat, hand-laid, fitted together in a way that didn't happen by accident. Caleb didn't touch them. He didn't need to. He just stood there, looking from the stones to the gate again. Same direction. No deviation. No break. Brandon took a step back. Denise, he said quietly. She ignored him. This is exactly the kind of thing we were concerned about, she continued, voice tightening. Unregulated land use. Unmaintained structures. This is why the HOA exists in the first place. Caleb turned his head slightly. Unmaintained? He repeated. Denise met his eyes. Yes. Caleb nodded once. Then he looked back at the line. Funny, he said. I've been maintaining this pond my whole life. He let that sit for a second. Just never saw this. The pump rattled slightly as it adjusted to the lower water level. The line stretched out in front of them, no longer hidden, no longer subtle. It pointed exactly where Caleb thought it would, towards something that didn't belong to him. Not entirely. He took a slow breath. Not anger, not yet. Just something quieter. Something that didn't need to be said out loud. Because whatever was buried under that water wasn't random, and it wasn't finished showing itself. Caleb looked at the gate one more time, then back at the stones, and for the first time that morning, Denise Whitaker stopped talking. Because even she could see it now. The line didn't stop at the pond. It went somewhere. Straight under something they had already built. And nobody there knew exactly what they were standing on anymore. The pump kept running. Caleb didn't shut it off. Not yet. He stepped along the edge of the pond, boots pressing into the damp soil, following the stone line as it revealed more of itself. It didn't shift. It didn't break. Every new section that surfaced only confirmed what he already suspected. This wasn't random debris. It had direction. Purpose. Behind him, Denise Whitaker adjusted her sunglasses, trying to regain the tone she'd walked in with. "This doesn't change anything," she said, sharper now. "You're reading too much into it." Caleb didn't answer. He knelt near one exposed section where the mud had pulled back cleanly. The stones weren't just flat. They were fitted, tight, worn smooth along the edges like something that had carried weight for years before it disappeared underwater. He reached down, brushing a thin layer of mud off one edge with the back of his hand. It wasn't concrete. It wasn't broken rock. It was placed. "Caleb," Brandon Hale called out, voice controlled but strained. "You planning to keep draining this?" Caleb stood slowly. "Until I can see where it goes," he said. Denise scoffed. "You already see where it goes," she replied. "Across your pond." "That's it. Old farm junk. Probably from before zoning was even—" "It lines up," Brandon cut in quietly. Denise turned to him. "With what?" Brandon didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to the fence, eyes narrowing as he followed the line visually from the pond toward the gate. "The access road," he said finally. "Same angle." Denise shook her head immediately. "No," she snapped. "That's not accurate. We had surveys done, full boundary checks. There's nothing under that gate except drainage." Caleb looked up at her then. "Then you won't mind if I check it," he said. She hesitated. "Just for a second." "That's not your property past the fence," she said quickly. "You don't get to just start digging into HOA infrastructure because you found a few rocks in your mud." Caleb didn't move. "I'm not digging," he said. "I'm looking." The difference hung there. Denise crossed her arms tighter. "You already looked," she replied. "You're done." Caleb glanced back at the line. It wasn't done. He could see more of it now, stretching beyond the pond's edge, faint under the thin layer of grass and dirt where the water had never fully covered it. A slight rise, a pattern, something you'd miss if you weren't paying attention, or if you didn't want to see it. A truck engine rumbled in the distance. Caleb didn't need to turn to know who it was. Elias Crow's pickup rolled up slow along the dirt road, stopping just short of Caleb's fence. The old man stepped out without a word, shutting the door with a dull thud that carried across the open ground. He didn't look at Denise, didn't look at Brandon. He walked straight to Caleb's side of the fence and rested his hands on the top rail, eyes fixed on the exposed pond. "Took you long enough," Elias said quietly. Caleb didn't smile. "You knew about it?" he asked. Elias shrugged once. "Knew something was there," he said. "Didn't know what it was." Denise stepped forward. If you have information relevant to this property, she said sharply, you should have disclosed it before we completed development approvals. Elias turned his head just enough to look at her. I don't disclose anything to people who don't ask the right questions, he replied. Denise's jaw tightened. We conducted proper surveys, she insisted. Licensed professionals. Who measured what was on paper? Elias cut in, still calm. Not what was underwater. That landed harder than she expected. Brandon shifted his weight, eyes moving between the pond, the line, and the gate again. Caleb spoke before Denise could respond. How long you known? He asked Elias. Elias looked back at the stones. Since your father was still fixing that north fence, he said. Water level dropped one summer. Just enough to show a corner of it. Thought it was a fluke. Next rain covered it again. Caleb processed that. Years. It had been there for years. Hidden in plain sight, waiting for the water to move just enough. Denise stepped closer to the fence, frustration creeping into her voice. This is speculation, she said. There's no record of any road or structure cutting through that section of land. If there were, it would be documented. Caleb nodded once. That's what I want to find out, he said. He pulled his phone from his pocket. Denise noticed immediately. What are you doing? She demanded. Caleb scrolled through his contacts. Calling someone who reads maps better than I do. He hit the call button. It rang twice. Tom, Caleb said when it picked up. You busy? A pause on the other end. Got something you need to see, Caleb continued. My pond. It's showing a line I don't recognize. Another pause. Then, straight line? Tom Alvarez's voice came through, sharper now. Doesn't bend, Caleb said. Give me an hour. The line went dead. Denise exhaled sharply. You're escalating this for no reason, she said. Even if there was something there decades ago, it doesn't override current property boundaries. That's not how land ownership works. Caleb slid his phone back into his pocket. That's exactly how it works, he said. She opened her mouth to argue. Stopped, because she wasn't completely sure. Brandon looked at her. Denise. She didn't answer him. Caleb turned back to the pond. The water had dropped another inch. More stones showed. More confirmation. The line was real, and it wasn't stopping. Elias pushed off the fence slightly. Question ain't what it is, he said. Question is why it ain't in your papers. That shifted everything. Denise looked at him, then at Brandon, then at the gate. Because if it wasn't in the paperwork, then either it had been missed or it had been ignored, and both were problems. Caleb didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The pump kept pulling water out of the pond, revealing more of what had been hidden, and somewhere between the mud and that locked gate, something didn't belong to the people who thought they owned it. The only question left was how far it went, and who had decided not to see it. The answer didn't come from the pond. It came from the sound of engines. Brandon Hale didn't shut his sight down, not even for a minute. By mid-morning, the machines were already moving again, excavators swinging wide arcs of dirt, loaders grinding over gravel, workers pacing out measurements like nothing had changed. The same trench they'd started 2 days ago cut deeper into the ground. Running straight across the path the stones were starting to reveal. Caleb stood at the fence and watched it happen. One tire rolled directly over the line, then another. The stones didn't shift. They didn't crack. They stayed exactly where they'd been placed, buried under years of water, and now being pressed under steel and weight again, like the land was testing how much it could take before someone noticed. Denise Whitaker stepped up beside Brandon, voice tight but steady. We're not stopping work over speculation, she said, loud enough for the crew to hear. There's no official finding, no documentation, and no authority here telling us otherwise. Brandon nodded, though slower this time. We've got permits, he added. Approved plans. That's what matters. Caleb didn't respond. He didn't argue permits. He didn't argue approvals. He just watched the machines cross that line again and again. Elias Crow leaned against the fence post beside him, arms folded. Funny thing about land, Elias said quietly. It doesn't care what your paperwork says if you're wrong. Caleb let that sit. Across the fence, one of the foremen paused long enough to look down at the ground beneath his boots. Just for a second. His eyes followed the faint ridge where the line cut through the dirt outside the pond. Then he looked back at Brandon. Keep it moving, Brandon called out. The foreman hesitated, then nodded. The machines didn't stop, but something had changed. They weren't ignoring it anymore. They were choosing to. Caleb pulled his phone out again, not to call, just to take a photo. He framed the shot carefully, the exposed stones in the pond, the faint continuation across the ground, and the trench being cut straight through it. Evidence. He didn't say the word, but it was already starting to form. Denise noticed. You planning to build a case out of dirt and rocks? She asked, her tone edged with something sharper now. Caleb slipped the phone back into his pocket. I'm planning to understand what's on my land, he said. That's not your land past the fence, she shot back immediately. Caleb looked at her. Then you shouldn't have a problem proving it, he replied. For a second, she didn't answer. Brandon stepped in before she had to. We already did, he said. Full title search. Clean. No easements, no encumbrances, nothing crossing that boundary. Elias let out a low breath through his nose. Nothing you read, he corrected. Brandon ignored him. We paid for the best surveyors in the county, he continued. Everything was mapped, cleared, and signed off before we broke ground. Caleb nodded slowly. That's what concerns me, he said. Brandon frowned. Why? Caleb turned back to the line. Because this didn't just appear this morning. That landed. The stones were older than the pond's current shape, older than the fence, older than anything Brandon's crews had put down. And if they were there, they'd been there when the surveys were done. Denise shifted her weight, voice tightening again. Even if there was something historical here, it doesn't override current ownership. That's basic property law. Caleb didn't look at her. Depends what it is, he said. Another machine rolled over the line, cutting deeper into the trench. Dirt collapsed inward, partially covering a section of the faint ridge where the path continued beyond the pond. One of the workers raised a hand. Hey, keep going, the foreman snapped, louder than necessary. The worker hesitated, then kept digging. Caleb watched the trench bite into the ground, slicing through something no one had actually confirmed yet. That was the risk. Not just for Brandon, for everyone on that site. Tom Alvarez's truck came into view an hour later, kicking up a trail of dust as it pulled off the road and stopped beside Caleb's fence. Tom stepped out with a measuring rod in one hand and a folded case under his arm, eyes already scanning the ground before the door even shut. What have you got? He asked. Caleb pointed. Tom didn't waste time asking questions. He walked straight to the edge of the pond, crouched down, and brushed mud off one of the stones with the edge of his glove. His expression didn't change, but he stayed there longer than expected. Then he stood, turned slowly, and followed the line visually across the land. All the way to the gate, then past it. Did you trace it? Tom asked. Not past the fence, Caleb said. Tom nodded once. Then he looked at Brandon. You mind if I take a closer look? He asked. Brandon crossed his arms. Depends, he said. You working for him, or are you just here to confirm what we already know? Tom didn't answer that. He walked the line anyway. Step by step, he followed the faint ridge as it cut through the grass, across the edge of the work site, and toward the trench where the machines were still moving. He stopped just short of it, looked down, then back at Caleb. This isn't random, Tom said. Denise let out a sharp breath. We've established that, she said. But it doesn't change. Tom raised a hand, not to argue, just to stop her. I didn't say what it was yet, he replied. That shut her up. Tom stepped closer to the trench, careful not to interfere with the equipment. He crouched again, studying the cut edge where the soil had been peeled back. For a second, no one spoke. Then he stood. It continues, he said. Brandon's jaw tightened. Continues where? Tom turned, pointing directly at the gate. Same line. Same direction. The crew had slowed down now. Not stopped, but slower. Watching. Because now it wasn't just Caleb saying it. It was someone who measured land for a living. Denise looked at the gate, then at Brandon, then back at Tom. It's drainage, she said, but the confidence was thinner now. There's a culvert under that gate. It's probably just following that line. Tom didn't argue. He just nodded slightly. Let's go look at it, he said. Silence hit the site for half a second, because that was the first time anyone had suggested crossing that line for real. Caleb pushed off the fence. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough to make it clear he wasn't waiting anymore. Brandon stepped forward. That's HOA infrastructure, he said. You don't just... Tom looked at him. If it's drainage, he said calmly, then we'll confirm that. And if it wasn't... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to, because every machine on that site was now sitting on top of something none of them had actually verified. And for the first time since the water started dropping, Brandon Hale didn't tell anyone to keep digging. He just looked at the gate and realized he might have built something over a line that was never his to begin with. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Tom Alvarez didn't wait for permission. He stepped past the fence line without hesitation, boots hitting the packed dirt of the HOA side like it didn't matter who claimed it. Caleb followed a few steps behind, slower, measured. Elias stayed where he was, watching. Denise noticed immediately. Excuse me, she snapped. You don't have authorization to cross onto HOA property. Tom didn't stop. If it's drainage, he said over his shoulder, then we're about to confirm it. Brandon hesitated. That was the moment everything shifted. Because normally, he would have backed Denise, would have shut it down, called security, made it a boundary issue. But instead, he walked toward the gate, not to stop them, to see it himself. Denise stepped in front of him. Brandon, we don't need to entertain this, she said quickly. This is exactly how you create unnecessary liability. If it's nothing, Brandon cut in, quieter now, then we prove it's nothing. Denise stared at him, then at the line, then at the workers who had stopped pretending they weren't watching. She stepped aside. The gate stood between them and the culvert, a heavy steel frame set into reinforced posts, locked with a thick chain and industrial latch. Beneath it, half buried in dirt and gravel, was the drainage pipe Denise had mentioned earlier. From a distance, it looked ordinary. Up close, it didn't. Tom crouched first. He brushed dirt away from the edge of the culvert opening, revealing the circular mouth of the pipe. Rust along the rim, packed mud along the bottom, weeds tangled around the sides where no one had bothered to clear it. Flashlight, he said. One of the workers handed one over without being asked. Tom angled the beam inside. For the first few feet, it looked exactly like Denise had said. Concrete lining, damp surfaces, a thin trickle of water still running through. "See?" Denise said quickly. "Drainage. That's all it is." Tom didn't answer. He shifted the light deeper. The beam moved past the concrete and stopped. Something changed inside that pipe. The reflection was different. Not smooth, not poured, textured. Tom leaned closer. "Hold it steady," he said. The worker froze the beam. The concrete ended. Beyond it, stone. Not loose rock, not debris. Cut stone, fitted together in the same pattern as the line in Caleb's pond, running in the exact same direction. Brandon took a step forward. That's not part of the culvert," he said. Tom didn't look up. "No," he replied. "It's not." Denise shook her head immediately. "That doesn't mean anything," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "They could have built the culvert through old material. That happens all the time." Tom reached down, brushing mud away from the lower edge where water had been running. The beam shifted slightly, and something else appeared. A larger stone, set deeper than the rest. Its surface wasn't smooth. It had marks, straight lines, cuts, not natural. Tom stilled. "Keep the light right there," he said. No one moved. Brandon leaned in, squinting. "What is that?" he asked. Tom didn't answer. He leaned closer, just enough to see the surface clearly. Then he exhaled once. "Letters," he said. The word hit harder than anything else that morning. Denise stepped forward despite herself. "What letters?" Tom didn't read them out loud. Not yet. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and took a photo. Then another. Close, precise. Documenting, not guessing. Brandon's voice tightened. "Tom, what does it say?" Tom stood slowly. He didn't answer that either. Instead, he looked at Brandon. Really looked at him. Not like a contractor. Not like a bystander. Like someone who had just realized the ground under another man's project wasn't what it was supposed to be. "We need that gate open," Tom said. Denise stepped forward immediately. "No," she said. "Absolutely not. That's restricted access." "You don't just open it," Brandon said. She turned on him. "Brandon, you don't understand what you're doing." "I understand enough," he replied. "Open it." Silence stretched. Because this wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was about risk. Denise didn't move, so Brandon did. He walked to the latch, pulled a key from his pocket, and unlocked the chain himself. The metal clanged as it dropped loose, echoing across the site louder than it should have. The gate swung open, and suddenly, the line wasn't theoretical anymore. It was accessible. Tom stepped through first. Caleb followed. The ground on the other side wasn't disturbed yet. No trench. No heavy equipment. Just packed dirt and gravel leading toward the main construction area. Tom didn't look at anything else. He followed the line. Straight from the culvert opening, across the ground, and toward the trench Brandon's crews had been digging. The same trench that had already cut through part of it. The workers stepped back as Tom approached, giving him space without being told. He crouched at the edge of the trench, brushing away loose soil where the excavator had sliced through the ground. More stone. Same pattern. Same direction. Unbroken. Caleb stood just behind him, arms at his sides, watching the confirmation unfold piece by piece. No surprise. Just clarity. Denise stepped through the gate last. Her heels didn't sound the same on this side. "What exactly are you implying?" she demanded, voice strained now. That there's some kind of buried road? That doesn't override a recorded property line. Tom stood up again. I'm not implying anything, he said. I'm confirming what's physically here. That doesn't make it legally relevant, she shot back. Caleb spoke before Tom could. Depends if it's recorded, he said. Denise looked at him. And if it's not? She challenged. Caleb met her gaze. Then we find out why. That hung there. Because now it wasn't just about what was in the ground. It was about what was, or wasn't, in the paperwork. Brandon looked from the trench to the culvert, then back to the gate. His voice dropped. We need to check the files, he said. Tom nodded. Yeah, he replied. You do, and for the first time since the pump started that morning, the land had stopped being quiet. Because what they'd uncovered wasn't just stone. It was something that had been built, marked, and meant to be found. The only question now was whether someone had already known it was there and chosen not to say anything. The answer didn't come from anyone talking. It came from what showed up next. Tom didn't leave. He didn't ask for permission. He just started marking. Out of the back of his truck, he pulled a bundle of thin orange flags, standard survey markers, and a measuring tape. No announcement. No explanation. He walked back to the edge of the pond and planted the first flag right beside the exposed stone line. Then he stepped forward 10 feet, measured, planted another. The line extended beyond what the eye could clearly see now, cutting faintly through grass and dirt. Where the stones disappeared, Tom followed the subtle rise in the ground, small shifts in elevation most people would never notice. Except him. Tom, Brandon said, trying to keep control of his voice. What exactly are you doing? Tom didn't look up. Tracing it, he said. Denise stepped forward immediately. You don't have authority to conduct a survey on HOA land, she snapped. You're crossing boundaries without authorization. Tom planted another flag. If I'm wrong, he said calmly, then these come back out. He didn't stop. And if you're not? Brandon asked. Tom stood, looking down the growing line of orange markers stretching from the pond toward the gate. Then you've got a bigger problem than permits, he said. That settled in hard. Because now it wasn't just about what they saw. It was about what could be proven. Caleb stood back, arms loose at his sides, watching the flags form a path that mirrored the stone line almost exactly. Each one landed with precision, no hesitation, no guesswork. Elias hadn't moved from the fence. He didn't need to. He just watched the pattern take shape. Across the site, the workers slowed again. This time, no one told them to keep going. The excavator idled in place, bucket suspended mid-air. A loader rolled forward a few feet, then stopped. One of the operators stepped down from his cab, wiping his hands on his jeans, eyes locked on the flags. They were starting to understand. Not the details, but the direction. Denise noticed it too. Why are we stopping? She called out sharply. There's no order to halt work. We have a schedule. No one answered her, because now the line wasn't just visible. It was mapped. Tom reached the trench again, stepping over the loose dirt where the machines had cut through part of the path. He didn't slow down. He planted another flag directly at the edge where the stone had been exposed earlier. Then another, and another. The flags didn't curve. They didn't adjust. They ran straight through the middle of Brandon's construction. Right across the trench. Brandon stepped forward, voice lower now. That's running through my foundation line, he said. Tom didn't correct him. He just kept marking. Because that was the point. Denise walked up beside Brandon, lowering her voice but not her urgency. "This doesn't mean anything legally," she said. "He's just placing markers. There's no official survey, no certified record." "Then why is it lining up?" Brandon asked. She didn't answer that. Because she couldn't. The pattern was too clean, too consistent. Caleb stepped forward slightly, just enough to see the full stretch of flags now connecting the pond, the trench, and the gate in one uninterrupted line. "This wasn't random," he said quietly. Denise turned on him. "That doesn't make it yours," she fired back. "And it doesn't invalidate the HOA's property claims." Caleb met her gaze. "I didn't say it did," he replied. "I said it wasn't random." That distinction mattered, because if it wasn't random, then it was intentional. And if it was intentional, then someone had documented it. Or should have. Tom reached the far side of the trench and kept going, flags extending past the main work area now, pushing into the untouched ground beyond where the crews had been operating. Brandon followed him this time, not to stop him, to see where it ended. It didn't. Not yet. The line continued toward a patch of low brush near the edge of the property, land the crews had walked past all morning without marking. Nothing there but weeds and uneven ground, until Tom stopped. He crouched, brushed away a thin layer of dirt with his hand. Another stone appeared. Flatter, wider, partially buried, but unmistakable. "Still going," Tom said. Brandon exhaled slowly. Behind them, Denise stood frozen, watching the flags cut across everything she had signed off on. Roads, lots, boundaries, all intersected by something that wasn't on any of her documents. One of the workers spoke up quietly. "Should we shut it down?" The question wasn't directed at anyone specific, but everyone heard it. Brandon didn't answer right away. He looked at the flags, then at the trench, then back toward the gate. Every piece of his project was now sitting on top of something he hadn't accounted for, something no one had told him about, or something he hadn't seen. Denise stepped forward again, trying to force control back into the situation. "No," she said firmly. "We don't stop work based on speculation. There is no official notice, no legal directive, and no reason to halt construction." A horn sounded from the road. Everyone turned. A small courier vehicle rolled up behind the site, stopping near the equipment trailers. A man stepped out, holding a flat envelope and scanning the area like he already knew who he was looking for. Tom stood up slowly. Caleb didn't move. Brandon's attention locked onto the envelope, because something about the timing didn't feel right. The courier walked straight toward them, boots crunching on gravel, eyes fixed on Brandon. "Brandon Hale?" he asked. Brandon nodded. The man handed him the envelope. "Signature required." Brandon signed without speaking. The courier didn't wait. He turned and walked back to his vehicle, leaving as quickly as he'd arrived. Silence followed him, because now everyone was watching Brandon. He opened the envelope, pulled out a single sheet. His eyes scanned the top, then the middle, then the date. His expression changed, not confusion, not anger, something tighter. "Read it," Denise said. Brandon didn't hand it over. He just said it. "Stop work order." The words hit the air heavier than any argument. Denise blinked. "That's not possible," she said immediately. "We haven't even filed." Brandon looked up. "It's dated last week." That stopped everything, because the pond had only been drained this morning. The line had only been exposed hours ago, and yet someone had already issued an order tied to something no one on that site had officially discovered. Caleb finally stepped closer. "Does it name it?" he asked. Brandon swallowed. Yeah, he said quietly. He turned the paper slightly, like he didn't fully trust what he was seeing. Road access corridor. The phrase settled in. Heavy. Specific. Real. Denise shook her head, stepping back. No, she said. There's no such designation on our parcel. That would have come up in the title. Brandon cut her off. It has a name, he said. Caleb watched him. What name? Brandon hesitated, because saying it out loud would make it real. And once it was real, everything changed. The flag stretched across the ground behind him. The stones lay exposed in the pond. The culvert sat open under the gate. And now, there was paper, official, stamped, dated before any of them had seen it. Brandon looked at Caleb, then at the line, then back at the paper. And for the first time since this started, he didn't argue, because the ground had spoken. And now, so had the record. The paper didn't move, but everything around it did. Brandon kept staring at the date like it might change if he read it enough times. Last week. 7 days before the pond dropped. 7 days before the stones showed. 7 days before anyone on that site had a reason to question anything. And yet, the county had already named it. Let me see it, Denise said, stepping forward. Brandon hesitated, not because he didn't want her to read it, but because handing it over meant he wasn't in control of it anymore. She took it anyway. Her eyes moved quickly across the page, scanning the header, the parcel number, the official stamp. Then they stopped. Right in the center. Same place Brandon's had. Road access corridor, she read under her breath. Her voice didn't carry the same authority now. It carried something tighter, controlled. What road? She said, louder this time. There's no recorded road here. That's not on any of our filings. Tom stepped closer, not reaching for the paper. Does it list coordinates? He asked. Denise didn't answer immediately. Because it did. She flipped the page slightly, scanning the lower section. Section reference. Boundary line. Corridor width. She read, slower now. Her hand tightened on the edge of the document. Brandon looked at her. Does it match? He asked. She didn't respond, which was answer enough. Caleb stepped in just enough to see the page without touching it. Where's it running? He asked. Denise swallowed. Her eyes lifted from the paper to the flags, then to the trench, then to the gate. Straight through, she said. The words landed like something breaking, because there was no interpretation left in them, no room for argument, just alignment. Tom nodded once. Then it's not a coincidence, he said. Brandon dragged a hand across his face, pacing a few steps away before turning back. That doesn't make sense, he said. If this was recorded, it should have shown up in the title search. We paid for full clearance, no exceptions listed. Tom looked at him carefully. Not on the front page, he said. Brandon frowned. What does that mean? Tom didn't answer right away. He stepped toward the trench, crouched again, and pointed at the exposed stone cutting through the soil. This didn't get here by accident, he said. And it didn't stay hidden by accident either. Denise stepped forward, voice rising again, trying to reclaim ground she was losing. Even if there's some historical designation, that doesn't automatically invalidate current development, she argued. There are processes, appeals, adjustments. You don't just shut down a project because of... Because of what? Caleb asked quietly. She turned to him. Because of incomplete information, she snapped. Caleb held her gaze. Then let's complete it. That stopped her again, because now the argument had nowhere to go. They weren't guessing anymore. They were matching. Ground to paper, stone to record. Tom stood and looked at Brandon. "You need your closing file," he said. "Full packet, not just the summary." Brandon shook his head. "That file's clean," he insisted. "I went through it." Tom cut him off. "You read it," he said. "You didn't trace it." That hit harder than anything else, because it wasn't an accusation. It was a fact. Brandon's jaw tightened. He turned back toward the equipment trailer, pulling his phone out again, dialing fast. "Get me the full Coleman parcel file," he said when the line connected. "Not the summary, the entire closing packet. Every page. Email it now." He ended the call before waiting for a response. Denise stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. "We don't need to escalate this," she said. "We can review internally, verify the discrepancy, and address it through the proper channels." Brandon shook his head. "It's already escalated," he said. He held up the paper. "County doesn't send this out for internal review." That was true. Stop work orders didn't ask questions. They made statements. Caleb looked past them, back at the pond. The water had dropped even further now, exposing more of the stone line. Clear, continuous, undeniable. What had started as a faint ridge was now a defined path cutting through the basin like it had been waiting for this moment. He didn't feel surprised. He felt confirmed. Elias finally pushed off the fence and walked closer, stopping just outside the flagged line. "Told you it was there," he said quietly. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah," he replied. Across the site, the workers had stopped completely now. No one was pretending. No one was moving. Because the paper in Denise's hand had changed the stakes. This wasn't about a disagreement anymore. It was about exposure. Denise looked down at the document again, scanning it one more time, like she might find something she missed. Something that would fix it. There wasn't anything. Just the same words. Same line. Same coordinates. She lowered the paper slowly. "This could be an error," she said. But even she didn't believe it. Tom shook his head. "Errors don't line up like that," he said. Brandon's phone buzzed. He looked down. Email notification. He opened it immediately. Attachment. Coleman Parcel, full closing file. His thumb hovered for half a second. Then he tapped it. The document opened. Page after page of dense text, maps, disclosures, legal language. He scrolled fast at first, then slower, then stopped. Because Tom was right. It wasn't on the first page, or the second, or the summary. It was buried, deep in the back. A section labeled Exceptions. Brandon's finger paused on one line. His breathing changed. Denise saw it. "What?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He zoomed in, read it again, then turned the screen slightly so she could see. A narrow strip. Measured. Defined. Excluded. Running across the parcel. Same direction. Same alignment. Same corridor. Denise's face went still. "That's..." she started. But she didn't finish. Because there was nothing to argue with. The corridor had always been there. Not hidden. Not erased. Just ignored. Brandon looked up slowly. From the phone, to the flags, to the trench, to the gate. Everything lined up, every piece pointed to the same conclusion. "We built over it," he said. No one corrected him, because there was nothing left to correct. The land had shown it. The record had confirmed it. And now, their own paperwork had admitted it. Caleb didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, watching the moment settle across the site. Because this wasn't the end. Not yet. This was just the point where the truth stopped being hidden and started becoming a problem for the people who had ignored it. The silence didn't last long, because authority arrived without being called. A county truck rolled in slow, tires crunching over gravel like it had done it 100 times before. No siren, no urgency, just presence, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Sheriff Cole Bennett stepped out first, hat low, eyes already scanning the site before the door shut behind him. He didn't ask what was going on. He didn't look confused. He walked straight toward the flags. Behind him, another vehicle pulled in, a plain white state truck. No markings except the plates. A man stepped out with a measuring wheel in one hand and a bundle of fresh survey flags in the other. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't need to, because he wasn't there to ask questions. He was there to confirm something already decided. Denise stepped forward quickly, forcing control back into her voice. "Sheriff Bennett," she said, "this is a private development site. We're in the middle of—" He walked past her. Didn't slow down. Didn't acknowledge the interruption. He stopped at the first flag Tom had placed and looked down at it, then at the ground beneath it, then along the line stretching across the property. "You Brandon Hale?" he asked without turning. Brandon stepped forward. "Yeah," he said. "What's this about?" The sheriff nodded once toward the paper still in Brandon's hand. "That your order?" Brandon hesitated, then handed it over. Sheriff Bennett took it, scanned it once, top to bottom. No hesitation, no confusion. "All right," he said simply. That was it. No explanation, no debate, just confirmation. Denise stepped in again, sharper this time. "We haven't been notified of any enforcement action," she said. "This document was just delivered, and we're in the process of reviewing." "You've been notified now," Bennett replied. Still calm, still steady, but final. The state surveyor had already started moving. He didn't wait for permission. He crouched at the nearest exposed stone, brushing away dirt with the side of his hand. He looked at it once, then pulled a flag from his bundle and planted it directly beside it. Then he stood, set the measuring wheel down, and started walking. Straight along the line, each step deliberate, each rotation of the wheel counted. Every few feet, another flag, bright, visible, permanent enough to matter. The line Tom had traced was now being replaced, verified, made official. The workers stepped back without being told. Machines shut down one by one, engines cutting out until the site went quiet, except for the slow ticking of metal cooling down. Brandon watched it happen like he couldn't stop it, because he couldn't. Denise turned to him, voice low and urgent. "You need to say something," she said. "We have rights here. They can't just walk in and—" "They're not asking," Brandon said. That was the problem. The surveyor didn't stop at the trench. He walked straight through it, flags cutting across the foundation line, marking a path that split Brandon's build clean in half. Dirt piles, stakes, measurements, all ignored in favor of something older, something already recorded. The line continued, toward the gate, under it, and beyond. Caleb stood back, arms crossed loosely now, watching the shift happen in real time. Not emotional, not aggressive, just certain. Because this wasn't escalation anymore. This was consequence. Sheriff Bennett stepped beside him without looking directly at him. "You Mercer?" he asked. Caleb nodded. "Yes, sir." Bennett gave a short nod. "You didn't call this in. It wasn't a question." "No," Caleb said. The sheriff glanced once toward the exposed pond, then back to the flags. "Didn't need to," he said. "That said everything." Denise overheard it. "What does that mean?" she demanded. "If this wasn't initiated by a complaint, then what exactly triggered enforcement?" Bennett turned slightly, just enough to face her. "County flagged it," he said. "Pre-existing record. Conflict with active development." Her expression tightened. "That's not possible," she said. "We pulled every record tied to this parcel." "You pulled what was summarized," Bennett replied. Same tone, same control. But now it carried weight, because the flags were still going down. The surveyor reached the gate, didn't slow, didn't look for approval. He walked under the open frame, following the exact path the culvert had revealed earlier. Another flag. Another. And then he kept going. Past the gate, across the interior access road, deeper into the development side. Brandon stepped forward. "Where does it end?" he asked. The surveyor didn't answer. He just kept walking. Because it didn't matter where it ended yet. What mattered was where it ran. Straight through everything Brandon had built. Denise's voice broke through again, louder now. "We are not halting operations without a formal injunction," she said. "This is an administrative review at best. There is no court order." "There doesn't need to be," Bennett cut in. That stopped her. He held up the paper. "This is enough to suspend work until the corridor's verified and cleared," he said. "You keep building on top of it. You're taking on liability you don't want." The word liability hit harder than anything else, because Denise understood that, and so did Brandon. The workers understood it too, which is why no one restarted their machines. The surveyor reached the far side of the site, near the brush line beyond the main construction area. He stopped, looked down, then planted another flag, then one more, marking the edge of something that didn't belong to the development, something that cut through it, defined it, limited it. He turned back toward the group, walking the same path he'd just marked, retracing every step, every flag, every line. When he reached the trench again, he stopped, looked at Brandon. "Nothing moves across this," he said. First words he'd spoken. Flat. Final. Brandon nodded once. Not agreement. Not acceptance. Just acknowledgement. Because there was no room left to argue. Denise looked at the line of flags stretching across everything she had signed off on. The gate, the road, the trench. All of it divided. All of it compromised. She didn't speak again, because for the first time since this started, her authority didn't reach far enough to matter. Caleb exhaled slowly. The pump was still running behind him, water still dropping, more stone still revealing itself, but it didn't need to rush anymore, because the land had already said what it needed to say. And now so had the law. No one argued after that, not because they agreed, because they couldn't. The line of flags cut through everything, clean, uninterrupted, undeniable. From the drained pond, across the trench, under the gate, and out the other side of the development like it had always been there waiting to be noticed. The machines stayed off, engines cooled in place, ticking softly in the still air. A loader sat half-turned in the trench, its bucket frozen mid-scoop. An excavator arm hung above the ground like it had forgotten what it was supposed to do next. No one gave the order to stop, but no one restarted anything either. Because now it wasn't a construction site. It was a boundary. Brandon Hale stood in the middle of it, looking at a project that had just been split apart by something he didn't own. His phone was still in his hand. The closing file open, that one line, buried deep in the exceptions, burned into his screen. Corridor, excluded, not his. Denise Whitaker stood a few feet behind him. For the first time since this started, she didn't have anything to say. No clipboard, no directives, no control. She looked at the flags like they were something temporary, something that could be removed. But they didn't feel temporary. They felt placed, measured, enforced. Sheriff Bennett stood near the gate, watching the site without moving. He didn't need to say anything else. His presence had already settled the question of whether this was serious. It was, and it wasn't going away. The state surveyor had finished marking the line. He didn't collect his flags, didn't adjust them. He just stepped back and looked at what he'd drawn across the land. A straight division, no interpretation left. Caleb Mercer stayed near his truck, just inside his side of the fence. He hadn't crossed back onto the HOA property since the marking began. Didn't need to. Everything he needed to see was already there. The pond behind him was still draining, slow, steady, the exposed stone line now fully visible across most of the basin. What had been hidden for years was now part of the surface again, no longer buried, no longer ignored. Elias Crow stepped up beside him. "Told you," he said quietly. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah," he replied. They didn't say anything else. Because this wasn't a moment for talking. It was a moment for understanding. Across the site, one of the workers finally broke the silence. "What happens now?" The question hung in the air, not directed at anyone specific, but everyone heard it. Brandon looked up, then at the sheriff, then at the surveyor. He didn't answer. Because for once, he didn't know. Denise stepped forward slowly, voice lower now, controlled but thinner. "This is a temporary suspension," she said. "We'll review the documentation, verify the corridor claim, and file the necessary appeals. This doesn't automatically invalidate the development." No one responded. Because her words didn't match what was happening in front of them. The flags weren't suggestions. They were placement. The trench wasn't paused. It was compromised. Sheriff Bennett spoke without raising his voice. "Nothing moves across that line," he said. Same words, same tone. But now they carried more weight. Because they had already been proven. Denise turned to him. "We'll comply with the suspension," she said. "But this doesn't settle ownership. That's a legal determination." Bennett nodded once. "Then you'll make it in the right place," he said. "Court." He didn't say the word. Didn't need to. Brandon exhaled slowly, looking back down at his phone. The exception clause. The corridor. It had been there, the whole time. Not hidden, just not read. He looked up at Caleb. "Did you know?" he asked. Caleb shook his head. "No," he said. That was the truth. And it mattered. Because this wasn't something Caleb had planned. He hadn't uncovered it to win. He'd uncovered it because it was there. And once it was visible, it couldn't be ignored. Brandon nodded slowly, then looked back at the site. His site. Now divided. Half usable, half uncertain. Maybe worse. Denise stepped closer to him, voice low enough that only he could hear. "We can fix this," she said. "Reroute access. Adjust the layout." "There are ways around." Brandon cut her off. "You don't build around a legal corridor," he said. She didn't answer. Because he was right. If that line held, everything changed. Caleb leaned against his truck, eyes moving from the flags to the pond again. The water had dropped enough now that the full width of the stone path was visible. It wasn't just a line, it was a structure. Narrow, deliberate, built for something that moved across land. Not water, not random use. Purpose. He looked back toward the gate, then beyond it, because the surveyor hadn't stopped at the boundary. He'd followed it further, which meant this wasn't just about Caleb's land, or Brandon's. It connected to something else, something outside both of them. Elias spoke again, quieter this time. "Roads don't go nowhere," he said. Caleb nodded. "I know." That was the next problem, because if the corridor led somewhere, then someone had rights to use it. And those rights didn't disappear just because a gate had been built over them. The silence stretched again. Not empty, heavy, because now every person on that site understood the same thing. The situation had moved beyond argument, beyond negotiation, into something that had to be resolved the right way, or not at all. The pump finally sputtered once behind Caleb, then steadied, still pulling water, still revealing what had been hidden. But slower now, because the urgency had shifted. The truth was already out. Now it had to be dealt with. And no one, not Denise, not Brandon, not even Caleb, could move forward until they knew exactly what that line meant. So they went where the line couldn't lie. The county records office didn't look like much from the outside. Low building, faded signage, a place people only went when something had already gone wrong. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet for what they had brought with them. Brandon Hale stood at the long table, his phone, the printed stop-work order, and a copy of his closing file spread out in front of him. Denise stood beside him, arms folded tight, eyes scanning every page like she was trying to find something that didn't exist. Tom Alvarez stood across from them. Rachel Benton had arrived 20 minutes earlier. She hadn't wasted time with introductions. She took one look at the documents, then at the photos Tom had pulled from the culvert, then at the flagged line traced across the property map. And she understood. "Start from the back," she said. Brandon frowned. "What?" Rachel tapped the stack of papers. "Not the summary," she said. "Not the clean pages. The back. The part nobody reads unless they're looking for a problem." Denise bristled. "We reviewed the entire file during closing," she said. "Every relevant section." Rachel didn't even look at her. "Then this won't take long," she said. She pulled the file toward her, flipping past the polished front pages. The purchase agreement, the boundary diagrams, the signatures. None of that mattered. Not now. She moved deeper, past disclosures, past zoning confirmations, until she reached a thinner section. Stamped, numbered, easy to overlook. Exceptions. She stopped, ran her finger down the page once, then again, slower. Tom leaned in slightly. "What do you see?" he asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She reached for Brandon's phone, pulled up the photo of the carved stone from inside the culvert, and set it beside the document. Then she aligned them, side by side. 3 characters carved into stone, 3 characters printed in the margin. Same shape, same pattern, same mark. Brandon saw it first. "That's..." he started. Rachel nodded once. "Yes." Denise leaned closer, her voice tight. "What is that supposed to mean?" Rachel finally looked at her. "It means," she said evenly, "the corridor wasn't discovered today." She tapped the document. It was recorded. The word hit harder than anything else in the room. Recorded. Official. Permanent. Brandon shook his head slowly. "That's not possible," he said. "If it was recorded, it would have shown up in the title summary." Rachel shook her head. No, she said. It showed up exactly where it was supposed to. She tapped the section header again. Exceptions. Silence. Because that word changed everything. Denise stepped forward, pointing at the page. That doesn't override ownership, she argued. An exception just means there are conditions. It doesn't mean the land isn't part of the parcel. It means this part isn't protected by your title, Rachel cut in. Flat. Precise. Final. She turned the page slightly, revealing a narrow strip drawn across the parcel diagram. Thin. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Running in the same direction as the stone line. Same alignment as the flags. Same path under the gate. Brandon leaned closer. That's the road, he said. Rachel shook her head. No, she corrected. That's the corridor. He looked at her. What's the difference? Rachel didn't hesitate. A road is something you build, she said. A corridor is something you don't own. That landed hard, because everything Brandon had built sat on top of it. Denise shook her head again, more forceful now. This doesn't invalidate the entire development, she said. At most, it affects a small section. We can adjust around it, reconfigure access, relocate structures. Rachel turned to her. You don't adjust around a recorded access corridor, she said. You respect it, or you get shut down. Denise opened her mouth to argue, then stopped, because Rachel wasn't speculating. She was stating. Tom stepped in, pointing at the alignment between the map and the photo. This matches the carved stone, he said. That means whoever built that line marked it intentionally, not just physically, legally. Rachel nodded. Exactly. Brandon leaned back slightly, the weight of it settling in. So we never owned that strip, he said. Rachel looked at him. You owned the parcel, she said. Just not all of it. He let out a slow breath. That's not what we paid for. Rachel didn't soften. That's exactly what you paid for, she said. You just didn't read it. Silence filled the room again. Denise turned away, pacing once, then back. This is a filing issue, she said. A disclosure problem. The title company should have flagged this more clearly. They did, Rachel said. Denise stopped. What? Rachel slid the closing file back toward her, flipping to a page near the front. There's a reference here, she said, to the full record, which includes this section. Denise stared at it. Small print. One line. Easy to skip. She hadn't seen it, or hadn't needed to. Until now. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, looking down at the documents spread across the table. So what happens now? He asked. Rachel didn't hesitate. Now it becomes enforceable, she said. He looked up. It already is. She nodded. That stop work order, she said. That's not a warning. That's enforcement. Tom crossed his arms. Meaning? Rachel met his gaze. Meaning nothing moves on that site until the corridor is cleared, verified, and legally acknowledged. Brandon exhaled slowly. And if it can't be cleared? Rachel didn't look away. Then your project never had a legal foundation to begin with. That was it. That was the line. The one that mattered more than the stones, more than the flags, more than the gate. Because this wasn't about discovery anymore. It was about consequence. Caleb had stayed quiet through all of it, standing near the end of the table, watching the pieces come together. Not surprised, not satisfied, just steady. Because this wasn't about winning. It was about truth holding its ground. Rachel gathered the documents into a single stack. "This doesn't end here," she said. "There'll be filings, hearings, possibly court." Denise nodded slowly, regaining a fraction of her composure. "Then we'll handle it there," she said. Rachel met her eyes. "You'll have to." She turned to Caleb. "And you'll need to be ready to prove where that line runs on your side." Caleb nodded once. "I am," he said, because he'd already seen it. In the pond, in the ground, and now in the record. Everything matched, everything aligned, and for the first time since the water started dropping, there was no uncertainty left. Only a question of what came next, and how much of what had been built would have to come down. The answer came faster than anyone expected. Not in a courtroom, not in a drawn-out fight. On the ground. 2 days later, the site looked different. Not because anything had been added, because nothing had moved. The flags were still there, bright, fixed, untouched. The trench sat open, cutting across the corridor like a mistake no one could erase. Equipment stayed parked where it had been shut down, untouched since the order came through. And now more vehicles had arrived. Not contractors, not investors, officials, county trucks, survey units, one legal van with state markings. This wasn't a review anymore. It was enforcement. Caleb stood by the fence again, same place he had been when the water started dropping. The pond behind him had begun to settle. The pump finally shut off. Water wasn't rising yet, but it wasn't falling either. The stone path remained exposed, clear, uncovered, unavoidable. Rachel Benton stood beside him, holding a folder thicker than the one Brandon had carried into the records office. "They moved fast," Caleb said. Rachel nodded. "They had to," she replied. "Once a recorded corridor is confirmed and obstructed, the county doesn't wait. Liability compounds the longer it sits." Across the fence, Brandon stood near the center of the flagged line, speaking with 2 officials. His posture had changed. No pacing, no arguing, listening. Denise stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching every movement like she was still trying to find an angle that didn't exist. One of the officials stepped forward and unrolled a document across the hood of a truck. Large, stamped, final. Brandon leaned in. Read, didn't argue, didn't question. He just nodded and stepped back. Rachel watched it happen. "That's it," she said quietly. Caleb didn't look at her. "What is?" "Final corridor enforcement," she said. "They've confirmed the alignment from record to ground. That line is protected. Permanently." Caleb nodded once. "Meaning?" Rachel didn't hesitate. "Everything sitting on it has to go." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to, because everyone already knew. The trench, the access road, the gate. Every piece that crossed that line wasn't supposed to be there. Brandon walked over a few minutes later. Not fast, not defensive, just direct. He stopped at the fence, looking at Caleb without the same edge he'd carried before. "We're pulling out," he said. Caleb didn't react. "Entire site?" he asked. Brandon nodded. "Anything touching that corridor has to be removed. County's not giving us an option." Denise stepped up behind him. "This isn't over," she said. "We can challenge the scope, push for reclassification, negotiate a reduced easement." "No," Brandon cut in. She froze. He turned to her. "You don't negotiate with something you don't own," he said. That was the difference now. He understood. Denise didn't answer, because there was nothing left to defend. Brandon looked back at Caleb. "You didn't know," he said. Caleb shook his head. No. Brandon nodded slowly. Neither did I, he admitted. That mattered more than anything else. Because it wasn't about blame anymore. It was about consequence. Brandon looked past Caleb toward the pond, where the stone line still cut through the exposed basin. That was always there, he said. Caleb followed his gaze. Yeah, he replied. Just needed the water gone to see it. They stood there for a second. No tension, no anger. Just clarity. Brandon exhaled once. We'll cover removal, he said. Full cost. Gate, trench, access road, all of it. Rachel stepped forward slightly. And the corridor? She asked. Brandon nodded. Marked, registered, protected. He paused, then added, We won't touch it again. That was the closest thing to resolution they were going to get. Denise turned away first, walked back toward the vehicles without another word. Her authority had ended where the line began. The officials started marking removal zones next, spray paint along the ground, notes added to clipboards, measurements taken again to confirm what needed to come out. The process was already in motion, not emotional, not dramatic, just exact. Caleb leaned back against his truck, watching it happen. The land hadn't changed. It had just been revealed. Elias Crow stepped up beside him one last time. Took long enough, he said. Caleb almost smiled. Yeah, he said. The pump sat quiet now, the pond still low. But it didn't matter, because the truth didn't need water to stay hidden anymore. It had already surfaced. Rachel closed her folder. You going to refill it? She asked. Caleb looked out over the exposed stones, the straight line, the path that had cut through everything without moving. Yeah, he said. Why? He watched the workers begin marking where the trench would be filled back in, where the road would be removed, where the gate would come down. Because it's still mine, he said. Rachel nodded once. That was all that needed to be said. Caleb walked over to the pump and shut the valve completely. The engine cut off with a final low hum. Silence followed. Real silence. Not tension. Not waiting. Just stillness. The kind that comes after something settles where it belongs. Behind him, the land was already being corrected. Ahead of him, the pond would fill again. And beneath it, the road would still be there. Unmoved. Unchanged. Because it had never belonged to the people who tried to build over it. It had only waited for someone to finally see it.
The lesson here is simple, but it's not easy. Just because something is writing on paper doesn't mean it's understood. Caleb didn't win because he found harder. He stood still long enough to let the truth show itself. That road, that corridor, was on its way there. It wasn't hidden. It was overlooked. And sometimes in life, what we miss isn't what buried. It's what we didn't take the time to really read, really see, and really question. There's a quiet kind of strength in that, not rushing, not reaching, not reacting, just holding your ground until the facts catch up. Because when things are built the right way, on truth, on clarity, they don't need folks to stand, and when they're not, they don't need folks to fail. And when they're not, they don't need folks to fall. If you ever deal with something like this, whether it's land, paperwork, or someone pushing boundaries that were If you ever deal with something like this, whether it's land, paperwork, or something pushing boundaries that weren't theirs. Drop a yes in the comments. I'm really glad to hear your story. And if you appreciate a story like this, real situation, real lessons, and people standing their ground the right way, go ahead and subscribe. There's more coming, and you're always welcome here.